Good afternoon. Welcome to Hau1. I'm extremely happy to see you all here. It's our last talk after a week of a lot of interesting and very different, I think, panels and talks. And we're exhausted but happy, but we are also extremely honored to have our last guest here in the Hau1 stage, a filmmaker who has already made a huge impact on the art world and on the music world, and he is premiering his first feature here, or he has been premiering yesterday, his first feature in Perspectives, called Black News, Terms and Conditions, and he's now here with us. I welcome on stage Khalil Shoulev and our wonderful moderator, Viviana Medina. Enjoy the talk.
Hello.
Hello, everybody.
Hello.
And thank you for being here.
Of course.
It's a pleasure meeting you. We just met, so. So, Khalil, you're not just a visual artist. Amongst other things, you are also a director, a storyteller who distills Black identities and memories and music into images that resonate deeply and linger long after. Your work is a poetic reflection on what it means to be Black, and not just in the US, in the diaspora, but in the whole world, I would say. And so you were born in the 1980s in Seattle. You grew up in a creative and intellectually stimulating environment. Like, that's what Google says. And also some interviews of you. You probably have always been drawn to what lies between the lines, and spiritual, fragmented, mythical elements and complex narrations that the industry often overlooks in Black storytelling. Your breakthrough came in 2012 with Until the Quiet Comes, which we're going to see today. Mm-hmm. And it's a hypnotic short film for Flying Lotus, for those that don't know, that made waves at the Sundance Film Festival. Mm-hmm. And in 2013, you followed up with Good Kid, Mad City, a short film for Kendrick Lamar that captured the essence of Compton. And in 2016, you became one of the lead directors for Lemonade, Beyoncé's groundbreaking visual album. The imagery in this project was radical. Black women in Victorian dresses, mythical water motifs, poetic introspectives, a cinematic ode to Black womanhood, and more important, or same importance, resilience. So you did a lot of art. That's so I can sum up like that. Yeah.
Thank you, guys.
You also showed, for example, here in Berlin in 2018, your audiovisual homage to Harlem, an immersive 20-minute film installation called Fly Paper. I'm really sad I could not see it. And now today, we want to speak about your long-term project, Black News, Terms and Conditions, which was invited to the Berlinale, and I had the privilege to just see it, just before, 10, 15 minutes ago. So I was like into your art piece for the last 3 hours because I had the privilege also to stop and go back and like deep into it. So thank you for Black News.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I made it for you guys, so yeah, that's awesome.
So I'd like to, because I don't know if all of you have seen already Black News, so I'd like to invite everybody to see the first clip. It's clip 2, and you're going to see it before we start our
That's a great idea.
conversation.
Yes. Great, yeah. We just...
Thank you. How,
I can contextualize. It's interesting watching that. I haven't watched it in a while.
yeah.
Black News started as like as an artwork for sure, but it wasn't in my mind a video piece. It was this idea of a media company as a work of art. And so one of the ideas that I had early on was, newsreels, like back in the day, newsreels before movies, like Pathé. That's how people used to get their news before, like TV news. I had the idea of having black newsreels in front of movies at movie theaters. Like when you go to the movies, before the trailers, they're just sitting there. And it's like really just tacky commercials. And I was like, oh, it'd be cool. And so I called Sundance and I said, hey, can I do black newsreels in front of your, like, there's different sections, the documentary section, et cetera. They had like 10 different sections at Sundance. And so I said I would do 10 different newsreels. And they were kind of like, yeah, that's kind of cool. And I said I'd give them to you. You don't have to buy them. And they were really excited for it. So we created all these newsreels. And I was, so that it didn't actually work out because they realized they had these like daily wrap-ups before each movie. And so what ended up happening is they said, can we just show Black News as like a program in the festival? And I didn't want to do that because, I didn't want people to go to a theater to watch Black News. I was trying to think of it as a media company, and it led me here to making a movie. That's the story, but it's a newsreel. But we made this newsreel for Steve McQueen's Lovers Rock, so you can see how thematically it was very English, British focused. And so at the time that movie came out, it was the pandemic. And so Amazon actually, that was a partnership with Amazon and Steve McQueen's film to make that a newsreel. And so that's the context for what you guys just watched. But also, you can, if anyone who's seen the film, there's moments from that newsreel that kind of made its way into the film, thematically or otherwise. Yeah.
Yeah, interesting, because I thought, okay, I saw the film, I just saw the clip, and I was like, okay, did I see, I saw some dots, but I couldn't, because obviously it's overwhelming with footage and knowledge and pictures and interviews, and so how would you describe then your film other than this clip we just saw?
Is there anyone in the audience who's seen the film? Oh, cool. That's cool. There's a, how do I answer that question? I'm obsessed with cinema, first and foremost, even before art or anything like that, or news for sure. So on one hand, I was a little, not disappointed, but the idea that I was making my first film as some adaptation of this, again, in the beginning, I was, I didn't really know what to do, how to approach it, Ultimately, I actually it was even better, I think, than any traditional script process could have been. It just allowed me to think about whatever it is I wanted to do on a certain level. But I did feel like I had to adhere to whatever news and journalism ideas and concepts I was taking seriously within the Black news world. And then pushing up against that as opposed to make like there was no genre that I had to worry about, you know, or genre expectations from an audience, maybe except news, you know, because it was called Black News. So, yeah, I was trying to be formally inventive, and I was also trying to have fun. And I also realized that I think people were going to expect some conceptual approach to Blackness, or whatever Blackness meant to people. And so Fred Moten, who's not in this, but one of the things he said early on that informed Black News was, like, Blackness isn't the exclusive domain of Black people, which I always found really provocative and amazing. In the same way whiteness doesn't belong to white people, you know, it's something that anybody can take on. And then I just kind of ran with that, you know. And also the idea, I remember he and others came to the writer's room. It wasn't like a traditional writer's room, but it was a group of people that came together to think about what the movie could be. And we had guests come in to talk to us, and he was one of them. And I remember the term diaspora is used a lot. And he said he didn't like that the word diaspora was a noun. And he said he was more interested as a verb, as like something that we're doing, as opposed to something that we are. And I remember the whole table was just like, what does that even mean? But it definitely informed, inspired a lot of the conversations and things I think that occurred. I mean, that's just a little, you know, at one point, he just had everybody crying. Like, what? Like, and he was talking about his son. He wasn't even talking about, you know, something sad, I guess, you know.
So when I rewind the film, for me it starts with the sorry, that's now difficult for German mother tongue speaking person. Encyclopedia. Africana. So for me, I had the impression, like in the first second, that you brought to life this Africana and then added all the knowledge of everybody that is working with you. So I had the feeling of an encyclopedia plus your inner encyclopedia, which was mind-blowing because it's so much, because you said, like, before everything it's news. For me it was so much knowledge. Not everything, of course, I could not know everything. Some things I really had to look up because I was like, okay, no, that's fictional. And I tried to categorize, which you also like saying, we want to go further than a category. It's not this, it's not that. It's maybe just not a noun. It's a state of being. Yeah. So, yeah. In your director's note, you said you were thinking of Black News as an album. So, and you also talked about having a writer's room. Can you elaborate a little bit more on how you work?
Yeah. The idea of it being an album, honestly, was more like what's the word? I needed to you know, sometimes you could say something to somebody that just gets them in a different state of mind, and you didn't really do anything other than and I needed to do that early on because we were making a movie, and everybody knows what a movie is in their head, but I knew this version of a movie would inevitably fall flat. it just wouldn't live up to all of its multifaceted glory. Where an album could do that, you know, an album could have all kind of stuff going on, and it didn't need to cohere in the same way as a movie typically does. And I had worked with enough musicians at that point to get a sense of how their albums had come together. And it was, you know, essentially they figured it out along the way. You know, it wasn't some perfectly pre-planned operation. And so I use that to kind of help everybody I was working with, from the producers to the studio to the actors, kind of understand what we were doing. I think it helped. I don't actually know what, you know, we also broke it down into tracks. We kind of took the analogy pretty far. I also realized, and you guys know this, you can find all your favorite scenes on YouTube of any movie, you know, and that's typically, you'll notice if you know, like any scene you want to see, you Google it, it's probably there. And it struck, and like same thing with the song, right? So it struck me early on how movies were already by the public were being considered pieces of a whole, you know, and people had their favorite scenes, people had their favorite sequences. I know that was true for me, and I remember, I think it was Wong Kar-wai and Stanley Kubrick independently said that in order to make a great film, you just need 6 great sequences, which also translate to have a great album, you need about 6 great tracks, you know? And I was like, wow, there's a lot of overlap between these two time-based mediums, you know? And so I know people, when they watch the film, are gonna have their favorite tracks, you know? And they're gonna have their least favorite tracks.
Speaking of which, I got one favorite track. So, because for those that haven't seen the film yet, you have to understand that it's not just YouTube footage, music, and news and collective, like art pieces, photographs, you name it. It's also staged.
Scripted scenes, yeah.
Scripted scenes, exactly. So one scene is we are on this interesting boat, Osiris, and we have 2 people in the coffee, in a lightless room, sitting on the table, and all of a sudden we hear birds, and then it comes this green painting of the crown of the tree, and we are listening to somebody singing, and then we switch back to the scene, and this woman is talking about one woman from Nigeria, which was enslaved and then brought to the US, and then she went back as a free woman. And it turned out that this woman was the mother of Fela Kuti, and the great-granddaughter is sitting on the table talking, like telling the story. And it was mind-blowing for me, really, like one of the 6. And
that's awesome.
Yeah.
You're the first person to say that that's one of your favorite tracks. I mean, you know, 12 people have seen the movie, so.
Yeah, love that scene so much because it's jumping back and forth, and like we have so many time layers, and it's also this question of, can you see the future? And I mean, you're seeing the future during your film, and it's great to see that. Just wanted to say that.
Thank you. That's awesome. That's a real story. Fela Kuti's mother, Funmilayo Ransome Kuti, her grandmother was captured and enslaved and sent to America, and then she found her way back. And she ended up giving birth to the lineage that we now know as the Kuti and Shonika clan. And they have a term in West Africa for, there's a whole, you know, over hundreds of years, there were people over time that were sent over to the Americas and then found their way back home, either however means that took. And they have a term for those people, because there's, you know, you can only imagine what it took to be able to do that. And that term has a kind of spiritual, I've been trying to find the right language for it. So anyway, when you think about that clan, that family of people that Shoinka is part of, he's her niece. And the idea is that so she survived the transatlantic.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of stuff that she experienced on the boats that's kind of supernatural, metaphysical stuff that kind of didn't find its way into the official, like it's not an encyclopedia entry, it's not a scientific, there's no way to, right, categorize that in the West. And she passed down that knowledge to her descendants, like what that was. And so I was really fascinated by that as a storyteller, like what is that knowledge? You know, like things that she experienced, learned, and heard. There's a guy, anyway, I'll go on to your next question.
No, it's your stage.
Alex Haley, who wrote Roots and the biography of Malcolm X. When he wrote Roots, he himself, you know, basically took that trip on a boat and he laid in the hold of the ship. And he talks about a similar kind of like, it's obviously not the same, but he did experience something that he basically got the download for the book by making that trade, you know. And he's much different, you know. So I'm fascinated. There's no term for whatever they experienced, but it made a lot of sense to me. And that concept that she's trying to unpack in the film, that we kind of attribute to the resonance field, as we called it. The resonance field is much larger than that, but that was the seed that character needed to even imagine that there was something called the resonance field.
So would you say then you finding your way to your creativity is more a spiritual work then?
I would think any artist, creative person would say that, probably, you know. Do you guys have the telepathy tapes out here yet? It's on Spotify, so there's no geographical boundary, but the telepathy tapes is a new podcast that came out in the United States. It's about non-speaking autistic community, and there's a woman who's been there's all these case studies of non-verbal autistic kids who are telepathic. They're talking to their mothers, their caregivers, and other non-verbal autistic kids. They're like having ultra deep metaphysical transcendent conversations. And I highly recommend it's the #1 podcast in the US right now. It's like bigger than Joe Rogan, which is pretty cool when you think about it. But they're not to give anything away, but to kind of bring it into this conversation. There's evidence that a lot of ideas that people have aren't their ideas, like at all. They're actually kind of given to you, you know, because you have a certain platform and a voice that some people don't have and that they need to get out there. So I don't know where I get some of my ideas, you know. I don't necessarily think they're me. They're either coming through me or there's something I see outside in the world that is interesting to me, which I can categorize as spiritual. But again, I think most creative people would probably say that. I mean, yeah.
And some people also would say there's fine arts and then there is filmmaking, and they would categorize, as you say. And pursuing this logic, you would build bridges between all these categories. What do you think about categories, and what was, or is your goal referring to your work? And after that, maybe...
Oh yeah, there's other stuff.
Before that, we should see the clip 4, sorry. And then
Sure.
I ask you again.
Sure. What's the question? been a while since I've seen that. That's crazy. Your question was,
what is your goal, or what is your intention? What do you have in mind when you do a work?
I mean, so what I do before I make anything is it sounds probably kind of basic, but I write out my intention of what I want before I even like concept, before I'm like taking it, whatever. I'll write out, this is for any young directors, artists out there. I'll write exactly what I want it to be and feel like in as succinct and clear as way as possible. It's not like a page long too, it's like 1 or 2 sentences, and I'll have to, and until I have that and feel good about that, I won't like start, you know what I mean? So if someone, and so it kind of, and it has to be original. So like I have a collection of them now, and every time, and I put it away. Once I'm like, that's it, I put it away and don't look at it ever, like until after it's finished. Like to be honest, I haven't even looked at the one for the film yet. It's 5 years ago, so I have to figure out where it is. But at least the ones, all the projects before that, they've always been they've nailed it. So I'll look back after I'm finished and I'll read it. I'm like, geez, that's crazy. And so sometimes, it's answering your question, but every project is a bit different. I definitely don't think in terms of maybe format, meaning like I don't know what that is, I mean, obviously it's a short film, I guess technically, but I started it out as my friend whose family that is. I had never been to Oklahoma, and this is 2013, so like the Black Cowboy thing was just non-existent as like a pop culture, thing. And she showed me black and white photographs of her family's rodeo, and I was like, this is incredible. I was actually in London in when was the Olympics in London? 2012? I was in London 2011, 2010, and the power went out at like a Dazed and Confused or something, and I was just there with a friend, and which meant that once the power went out, all the computers and stuff shut down, nobody's phone worked. And so people had to like talk to each other. And so everyone was just like hanging out all of a sudden. And again, I had just come with a friend, so I had no business being there. And then because through conversation, someone was like, oh, this is my friend Khalil, etc. And the guy who worked at Days, we finally found out that he was like, yeah, we have this budget from the Olympics to make stuff that's sports oriented, but like there's no real. And I was like, oh, I showed him. I was like, there's this rodeo thing I kind of want to make. And he was like, yeah, that sounds cool. And that was it. And so when we were in the edit, I did all these interviews. And so for a long time, it had this documentary vibe and talking heads. And it just wasn't, it was cool. And then I remember calling Flying Lotus and showing him the footage. The footage was always just like amazing. And he sent me a song, which was this song. And his aunt is Alice Coltrane. His first aunt is Alice Coltrane. And so he has all this music that she never has released. And he made that song. This is Alice Coltrane's song that Flying Lotus kind of put his spin on. And when I called him for music, I was not wanting this in my head. I was like wanting like Flying Lotus, And I remember listening to it and being like, oh my God, like this is not what I have in mind at all. And I actually put it aside because he gave me some other stuff. He said, this is the track, but I'll give you other stuff too, and sure enough, like 4 months of me fucking around, I went back to the track he suggested, which was that, and I got rid of all the documentary stuff, and that's what that is. So and it nailed my original intent when I went back to it too. That's a long answer. I'm sorry for.
No, perfect. All good. So speaking of music, we've seen and I've also read that you are, like, one of your main ingredients is music. Can you speak a little bit about what is your link to music and what does music for you?
The short answer is it's the one space I would say where Black creativity is at its fullest potential. So
In the US?
I think ever, personally. I'm it's not the conversation, but for me, I can listen to Nina Simone, classical, Alice Cole. It's so expansive. As you know, so you have whatever you want to do or be as a Black musician. I think it exists. You don't have that in film. You don't have that in literature. You don't have that in any other. For me, any kind of, and it's accessible in a way that. So I think there's something there. If I was to just have a diet of movies or images or something, I think it would be limited. It's also a time-based medium, like film, and there's something there for me that I don't find anywhere else. I think that's there for a lot of people, and I think what I've learned is I want to try to get my work closer to what music feels like, where you can, when you hear a good song or a good album or good music, it's just. I think what cinema can be for me is even more expensive. I'm just using that as a kind of like what's going on there, like because you have character and dialogue and all these other things that you just like, for instance, voiceover is something that is only. I remember in film school they teach you don't use voiceover. And I remember being like, why not? It's the only art form that can actually utilize it. And you could do all this stuff, and sure enough, all these great filmmakers are like, yeah, don't not do voiceover yeah.
I would open the questions. Like, I still have some questions, but I love to. Yeah, please. Can we have some light in the audience? Thank you.
Hello, thank you so much for being here. My name is Ifeanyi Arinze. I'm a talent, and I haven't had the pleasure and delight of seeing Black Muse yet, but it's on my list because our schedule has been so intense. But from the excerpt, I just appreciate what you're doing with cinema, and even what you said about just pushing the boundaries of what cinema can be and look and feel like. And watching that clip, I haven't seen the film yet, but I think, those films where like somebody's like trying to solve a mystery and there's a board and there's all these clippings and you see the red, thread. Watching that clip, that's what it did for me, and I could just feel your mind, just like connecting all the dots. And I was just curious about your editing process and just how you use, if you can talk about rhythm and if you can talk about because I'm like, oh wow, like it just feels so incredible and profound and just like expansive, how you're connecting the dots between all the parallels between all these timelines and all these geographical places and political events. And so I just would love to hear your thoughts about your editing process and using rhythm and contrast and tension.
That's
in your
awesome.
work.
That's a great question. Thank you. One of the things that Black News allowed me, and I'm interested in, is, and where news comes into the conversation, is that news kind of suggests that it's a linear event, or it's only current events. And I think, and that news is just anything that you didn't know before you knew it. And that's a lot of shit. And so it's actually not linear. It's actually non-linear. So, we're learning stuff every day. And the way my mind works is I'm able to, and I think a lot of people's mind, for sure. I just happen to maybe be a filmmaker, an artist who just wants to, and I edit, so I'm trying things all the time. Like, it's an ahistorical medium, actually, and not like a linear narrative. So once I really started understanding that, and it started to create some of the things that you're seeing, and then I started realizing it's not what contemporary art gave me as I approached news is I had to ask myself, like, what is contemporary art? This is such a weird field because it's not about who can draw the best or who the best painter is. It's something else. And it's not just about who you know, which I also have heard, because all that's important, but I think that's important whatever you do. I think it's about context. It's about why is this art, and trying to frame that out. But anything can be contemporary art. That's where we're at now. So, it could be a crushed up car in the middle of a museum floor, and you're like, okay, but they can tell you why in their mind it's art. And so for news, I realized, okay, what I basically said is anything can be news, too, given context. So stand-up bit, or someone talking at something, or a meme, or a music video clip, like anything can be news. But I had to just give it context. And so that's why it feels like anything that I can get into the computer, again, graphics, paintings, photographs, music, like old voicemails. Like in my head, I'm like, what can it not hold? Which I got from conceptual art, maybe. I mean, not contemporary art, but conceptual art. Anything can be art given context. I said anything can be news given context. And so what you're seeing my mind doing is working out context. And through context, history just becomes irrelevant, or linear time becomes irrelevant. And then I realized, Black news was very selfish in that I'm like a lot of people, I think, really curious. And I want to learn. I think that's why I think YouTube is so popular, because you end up watching talks about people, things that you're not even realize you're not even interested in. You'll watch like a 2-hour talk on, right? People, how do they build a home from scratch, and the Appalachian, they're like, all right, this is cool. And in that process of just constantly learning, again, like everybody, I realized there's all these connections being made, And a lot of the connections, I think you noticed, aren't even literal. They're more, it's like music, in my opinion. Like, there's a lot of great lyrics, I don't even know what they mean. But I can feel it, Like James Brown, I don't know if I've ever understood a James Brown lyric. And I can know exactly what he's saying.
Well, can you talk about rhythm and tension really quickly?
That's like a nervous system thing, if that makes any sense. Like I don't dance, I don't sing, I don't have pitch. I mean, I dance, but I don't bring that to my work, I guess. I do think good filmmaking is about rhythm. Like there's some people like David Lynch or Kubrick or something who I can't tell you why their movies are great. I've heard people try to break it down, and I disagree with everything I've ever read. And I think it has everything to do with rhythm and pace. And so I just had to figure out, and I think it's a body thing. So if you're a filmmaker, I just would I don't know how to do that, but just figure out what feels good to you in your body, not in your mind. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
We have a question. And first, Yeah, and then the second one, that person. Yeah.
Hi, Khalil. Hi. Hi, my name is Bennett. I'm part of Each One Teach One. I think you were hanging with our CEO yesterday. And so I'm sad because I was hoping to also see your film today, but I'm also very happy to see you talk. My question is, I'm also a filmmaker. I'm starting off. My medium is documentary, and a thing that have been thinking about for a long time is the aspect of extracting stories as a filmmaker, extracting emotions, stories, as I said, pain, and how to stay. In German, it's integer. I don't know what that word is in English. Maybe to stay.
To not lose your integrity.
Yeah, integrity about it, because at the end of the day, I mean, it's a spectrum, right? You could also give all the proceeds of your film to that person or to whatever, thing that you extracted, or you can just not stay in contact and just put yourself on that stage and be like, yeah, well, I'm that great filmmaker that did this. But yeah, is that even a topic for you, especially when it's about political topics and activism and as I said, topics of pain and trauma, how to deal with that when you then tell these stories?
Oof.
Sorry.
It's a great question. And I don't know if I have the perfect answer for sure, because every situation is different. I mean, you have to have your own ethical compass in life, but definitely as a filmmaker and as an artist, because everyone has their own, not just agendas, but where they're at in life. So you could be doing a documentary on someone or something, and they have an agenda. They're trying to pay their rent or move the needle for their cause or whatever it is. You get more exposure. And in their mind, they have calendars and deadlines that are important to them, and they've let you in, etc. But you have also circumstances and concerns and agendas, budgets, and you have to figure it out. You got to put it together. You need to find people to work with, and you really got to navigate that for yourself. I personally am. I'm pretty intense in my staying true to whatever it is that I'm trying to do, because I don't know necessarily what the largest purpose of the thing that I shot is, I try not to necessarily just listen to what I think, and I don't try to listen to what whoever other people's concerns are. I'm trying to give you an example. So I had an agenda. I did a project for Kendrick Lamar. She said, Good Kid, Mad City. He approached me to make concert visuals for his first tour. I had never done concert visuals. I ended up shooting a bunch of footage in Compton, and he used it for his backdrop. I had cut it together a little bit, and then he used it, right? And for me, I guess I had agreed to do that because I was going to cut together a short film, which ended up becoming Good Kid, or Mad, I call it Mad, with the expectation that, yeah, he needed it as concert visuals, but once I delivered him the short film, he was going to release it. Like, that was the agreement that we had, because what am I going to do with concert visuals? I'm not trying to be a concert, right? I'm not trying to creative direct concerts. The only reason I said yes is because I could use it for my short film. And so I didn't get paid. It was a ton of money and a ton of work that just went into the concert visuals. So it took me like 9 months to edit the thing. So by the time I was like his concert, he was done and the concert was over. He had already moved on to Pimp a Butterfly. Like he was working on To Pimp a Butterfly. It hadn't come out yet. And so by the time I finished, and I said, here, Kendrick, here's the short film I spent all my energy, money, life on. And he watched it, he was like, this is amazing, dude. Like, I'm gonna take this up to he literally, I never forget, he said, I'm gonna take this up to the top. Cut to, they shelved it. they didn't want nothing to do with it, right? That was their agenda. They had their agenda. He didn't care about my agenda at all. And I was devastated. And I thought it was unethical. I thought it was disrespect, all the things. He was working on The Pimp a Butterfly. In my mind, they had to do was put it on his YouTube. Like, that for me would have been everything, right? People were waiting for my next thing after Flying Lotus. They wouldn't do it. And so little did I know that what the universe had in mind for me was different. And so my brother at the time decided to put on, my brother wasn't worried about me. He was putting together an exhibition and saw me working on the thing and was like, this could be a cool installation. And I was like, why would I do that? Like, I'm not trying to be an artist, dude. I want to be a filmmaker and make videos and films. And I said, but what else? I didn't have any other options. And my brother at the time had a place called the Underground Museum that nobody knew about or was coming to. This little, like, no one in LA knew about this thing. And you know what I mean? He didn't, so cut to, I let him do it. I make another channel, so it's 2 channels. And I'm like hemming and hawing the whole way, pissed off, holding on to this grudge. And because of that, I ended up getting this huge career as an artist because local curators had found out about it. I get a show at MoCA. Right, lo and behold, I'm in a better situation than what I would have been if my intention and my desires, if Kendrick had acquiesced and actually listened to me. We're like each other, like nah, bro, I got my own agenda. I appreciate what you did and I'm listening to you and I understand that you didn't get paid, that you did this from the strength and you can't use concert visuals. I don't give a fuck. He just didn't, and God bless him, because what happened is I now have a whole career that brought me to Black News. You see what I'm saying? So you have to be vigilant, despite people being mad at you for valid reasons, maybe to them. But that's your own ethical compass. Some people wouldn't have been as bold as he was to be like, "Fuck this guy," I appreciate what he did, but I got my agenda, Did I answer your question?
Yes. No, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your insights and your beautiful work. I would like to add on and ask a question about, in your work you intertwine like facts, fiction, history. What motivates you to blur these lines, and how did you envision when you did this work that this approach will affect the perceptions of your audience in terms of media and reality?
Well, maybe because YouTube exists. I think people are all in social media, like, it's already a blur. You're already seeing like old videos from the 90s and then somebody on the ground in Gaza and there is no, and then you get a meme, it's just like kind of crazy. And our brain has just fused it all together already. And, I go to the movies, not a lot, but when I do, it's empty. But social media feeds are packed, and I'm just paying attention and being like, I think there's something to learn here. I don't think movies need to look like our social media feed at all, but I do think there's something to understand about the evolution of the thing, I don't think there's ever been distinctions, to be honest, but the economy is real, and economy works when you compartmentalize things. But social media has taught us, and YouTube, that it's, I think it's really about holding people's attention, getting people to like what you make. I think that's been the history of it all, and that's where I'm at. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Is there any other question before we?
There's a question over here.
Okay. Perfect.
I'm sorry for being so rude, but we're being missed sort of as a section.
Sorry,
So-
it's because of the light.
No, it's not your
Sorry.
fault. That's why I screamed. But yeah, thank you so much. And also sending greetings from Sheba. Yeah, I saw this film yesterday and I'm still processing. But like one part that I was really, really curious about was sort of the process and like also the collaboration, because you've been like working on this for such a long time. And like yesterday watching it, like I feel like the scenes that stuck the most to me were all of these of like Du Bois, like him like walking around Philadelphia, him like in Ghana then, and he's like such a gigantic figure, but he is ambivalent, and I love that you kind of like throughout the like film, this ambivalent kind of shone through. I felt, and I was like curious. I was like, what it changed for you generally, like within the process of making this film, in terms of like the knowledge you had, like ideas that shifted. And like maybe with, if you're looking at Du Bois as a point of reference for this, also, you know, is the Du Bois that Garrett Bradley's working with the same Du Bois that you're thinking of or working with when you were shooting in Ghana? And like how close was also the writing process between you for this section, or also for other ones? Like how close was the conversation, were the conversations between everyone who wrote, in terms of like how it all came together, and also how did it maybe change in the meantime?
Oh, okay. It's a great question.
Huge question.
No, yeah. The one thing I also take from music that does not exist in film is if she's a musician, I have an album, like I love her music, right? I'm not gonna ask her to, if I want her to be on my album, it's that simple. Will you be on my album? Will you be on this song? And then she says, sure, that sounds dope. And then that's it. Like, and then we're off to the races, and I'm sending her stuff, she's sending me stuff, she's coming by, etc. That doesn't happen in Hollywood. Hollywood is like, I like your work. Now, prove to me through scripts and pitches and everything else why I need to, you know? And the art world is similar to the music thing, where it's like a museum and gallery will say, we want to do an exhibition with you. And you're like, great. And then you kind of start imagining what that might be. And so those are the worlds I had come from. So when I approached Garrett, whoever, even though she had never really worked with actors like that, she had come from documentaries, I was like, you're dope. Will you be on my album? And I was like, I kind of painted, I said, I want to shoot some stuff with Du Bois, we're going to use IMAX cameras, and we're going to shoot in Africa. That's all I said. She was like, dope, you know? And I didn't really question her process, I guess. I didn't, you know, and I think that gives people a certain level of confidence to explore and show up and figure it out, which is what typical creativity is like. But in general, in terms of Du Bois and stuff, I was interested in what, I think if you were to ask Du Bois about his life, he would have said he was a failure. Like at the end of his life, that's how he talked about. And that's why the encyclopedia was interesting to me, because if you've seen the film, you know, he died right before, like as he was getting started on it. So that was a failed project. And in general, his life was to kind of, you know, fix the color problem. And he spent his whole life trying to do just that. And it probably, you know, to he'll say it only got worse by the time he passed away. And so I was fascinated by these things that were perceived like failures, whether it's Marcus Garvey or Fannie Lou Hamer, like they ended as, you know, in jail or excommunicated to Africa or dead prematurely, broke, right? And it's crazy because we receive these figures as like the not failures. In fact, they're like larger than life icons and superheroes or something. And that struck me, and like that dichotomy between how they perceive themselves and how maybe successful they were, but what that gave this new generation of in fact, I'm kind of a lot of the things that are perceived as big hit successes were like radical failure. Like the Kendrick thing, for me, was like, that was a failed mission that turned into a pretty big success, maybe retrospectively, does that make sense? No.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Is there any other? Yeah. In the first row and then the second one.
Hi, Khalil. The short version of my question would be, what is your problem with vowels?
With vowels?
Yeah. In the way you spell Black News, you know, there are no vowels in it.
Vocals.
And I do think, I mean, my reading of that would be somewhat pseudo-poetic, where I would say the absence of the vowel is a disavowal. In the sense that Black history is, and in the way that you've presented the news, it somewhat reminds me of Michel Roth-Trouillot's Silence in the Past, where he's talking about, you know, how we read history, how we come to write history. And in many ways, I think that Black history has no content, given that most of the archive of Black lives is controlled, you know, by whiteness, and given that there is a lot of aphasia and amnesia in remembering colonization, for example, or racism, and even when you get access to the archive, people are recorded as numbers, you know, in this sort of arithmetic form, what Saidiya Hardman would say, you know, the details accumulating on the archive like ditto, ditto, ditto. And somewhat I feel that, you know, that absence of vowels in the title is a disavowal of that system of silencing, especially Black pain and history as such, and that's what you seek to do. But then there's a book by Yamba Wologem which starts with, like, to understand the history of Black people, you don't need to go back centuries, you just need to look at their condition today, you know, and somewhat I feel that that's what Black News does, because when you see Wole Soyinka speaking, it's somewhat reminiscent of today, if one can put it this way. And I don't feel that we have come from a system or from a place where we no longer have, you know, Proud Boys going on the street. There's just an institutionalization of those, you know, values, of those things that we feared. You know, I think I fear police in Germany the same way that he was afraid of, you know, the white men that he speaks about. And so I wonder if that was an intentional thing for you to not have the vowels in it, or if it was just like an aesthetic choice, and if you've had like other readings of, say, your title and the discussion around, you know, what constitutes the past for Blackness.
It's a big question, thank you. The Black News was always just the working title. And as I pitched it and stuff, I think it just kind of stuck. There wasn't a better title, apparently. At the time, there was a Kerry James Marshall exhibition called Mastery in LA. And we were close to that conversation as it was coming together. And I was watching a lot of his videos as he talked about that term. And it inspired kind of some of the readings of what Black News was becoming, which was I've said this before earlier today if anyone was there, Black News is kind of like the BBC or CNN in that we all understand those are from white perspectives, but you can have an Indian, Pakistani, Black, Latina anchor reporting on Black, Pakistani, Latina issues, but we all know it's from the BBC POV or the CNN POV. And so Black News can have different anchors and cover different things. It's not only interested in Black life, like that's ridiculous. You know, that's part of the problem, I think. And so it's not quite Black, It's not quite news. So we took BLK isn't black and NWS isn't news, but when you see it spelled like that, and there isn't, I think, an aesthetic beauty in the logo, which also kind of helped. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
Interesting. You asked about other readings. I thought about Arabic. So you don't, if you write, you would not write down the vocals. So you always just have BLK and so on and so forth, but no A, O, E.
It also felt like younger. Like, when you ever get like text messages from young people, you're like, what is...
Cute.
I mean, it's true. It was like more efficient.
That's, of course, you're American. Okay.
It felt black too. It felt black, you know, like if you, I have a friend, the way she texts me is just insane. And I like frame them sometimes. I take screenshots because it's like poetry, you know, the way she frames things is incredible, yeah.
Nice. We had some more questions in the first and the second row.
Yes,
I don't
sorry.
know which hand was first. Sorry.
I got the mic, so sorry.
One last thing.
Hey Khalil, so obviously I was privileged enough to see the movie twice now, so, and you talked about the importance of music and you conceptualized it like an album. So apart from the fact that it has these thematic tracks, what I thought was really interesting that the sound was so tight. All the footage came from all different kinds of sources, sometimes quite jarringly edited together, but it never felt jarring. It felt smooth and seamless. So I was wondering how you, for instance, The Amazing Klein did some of the score, but some of the stuff was like Tabner, Sampras, and a lot of other stuff, and the crazy Robert Hood track. So what would you say about how did you approach also in the edit? Were there parts that where the sound led and you knew that you wanted the specific thing to like accompany the sound, or was it always the visual first? And how did you mix the whole thing at the very end?
Yeah.
Sorry.
I'm not too self-aware about my process, I'll be honest. I understand where the question is coming from. I really am close to the editing process, and so is my team, and so is Black News in general as a practice. Yeah, I don't know if I can answer that question, but I can maybe speak to, is there a sequence that you have in mind? Maybe I can use that as a...
Well, not specifically, just the sheer fact how, for instance, I mean, I'm sorry for the people who haven't seen it, but...
There's no way to give away the film, though. So.
No, exactly. So, but seeing it now twice, you kind of like, oh, you see a structure, and it has kind of this elliptical structure also, where you get like, okay, for instance, the Robert Hood at the beginning, at the end, and then you see like, oh, let's put Sampha in there.
Oh yeah, that wasn't predetermined.
Yeah.
Yeah, not even, no. It's kind of like, if you have friends who are musicians, you ever seen them put together an album? They have a collection of songs. So if only 12 make it, there's 30 songs or something that they're choosing from. There's a version of this film that's that. I'm sure a lot of filmmakers, there's a lot of scenes that are not there, etc. So that was part of it. You know, what do we need? What's not there? What do we have too much of? You know, we should start like this, given where the thing is going. Some of it's just real logical, and that's kind of again came together at the end. That techno Robert Hood track came in at how it starts, came in so late, like so late. I mean, it was like like when I said I don't know where these ideas come from. Like it was kind of like, Lord, I need a better opening. And then I just, put my head to it, and I found the encyclopedia, it was that, like how Rick Rubin talks about, like stop working so hard and just kind of open up your field of awareness. It was kind of like that.
So, but was it purely in like emotional response to, for instance, like in Flypaper, you have this also very dense tapestry of sound. Were there some, I don't know, some approaches that you carried on to Blackness in the same way?
I mean, yeah, it's hard. I've never actually really examined I mean, honestly, this is my first time sharing the film after 5 years, so part of this is just new. Maybe in 6 months after I've talked to it about, actually reflected on it. Like we were editing a couple weeks ago, so I might have a more, I'm sorry, succinct answer.
Don't worry.
Clear. We have one more thing to show now.
Yeah. There was one person in the first row.
Hello, thank you so much for your body of work. I had a question regarding basically why do you think there is so much pushback towards nonlinear narrative by financiers and like Hollywood studios or whatever today? Because I feel like, I don't know, it's like the new language of film, and I do think regarding what you were saying earlier about social media, that are so popular, etc. It feels like it would speak probably more to younger generations that have been brought up, with social media and reels, etc. But somehow it feels like the system is not picking up to it, and I was wondering, what you think about that.
What I've learned is it's not this industry's job to innovate. Their job is to make money. It's our job as filmmakers to innovate, no matter what. Like, no one at Fox or wherever is gonna be like, oh, we should start making things differently. It's like, if you look at the history of any, and you learn about how they did it, they fucking barely survived. George Lucas stopped making movies after the first one, or the second or third one. His first Star Wars, he never directed again. It was that painful and arduous for him. Or you read about Fellini trying to get those movies made. He had to be, he literally spent most of his time tricking producers about what he was actually up to, Or you hear about Antonio, just to keep it in the Italy register, what Antonio did is like, and he's a rich guy. He was a rich kid with a beautiful actress, and he had to kind of beg, borrow, and steal to get La Ventura made. So these things we look back on as these kind of pillars of the canon, maybe, or are people who literally beg, borrowed, and steal and to try to create what we've now inherited as traditional cinema. And so I know that, and I also learned, in order for me to get my ideas across, I was going to have to, finesse the system. And so I did it in all the kind of different ways that I knew how, I also tried to create a little bit of a interest in what I was doing on my own. So like if I wanted Hollywood's attention, it's just like anything. You don't go and try to get their attention. You do something else. Because everyone's looking outside of, right, like what's in front of them. Like if you live in a small town, you want to go out, only to realize I kind of liked it where I was. I realized people looked outside of where they're at. And so I kind of, in order to get Hollywood's attention, I didn't try to do anything inside of Hollywood, if that makes sense. I kind of sketched around the edges to people be like, what's that guy doing?
But I also was wondering, because basically you had this experience, I don't know if it's controversial to talk about it, but with your financier dropping out before Sundance and removing the film from Sundance. And so they do have that power over filmmakers. And
sure.
Thank God, to you it didn't happen, but in the end, so that's what I was also referring to, is that basically because it's a system contrary to art, for example, where you, well, maybe not contrary to art, but where you depend so much on these people to get your work out there, basically?
All I can say is you gotta build your community, because it's easy to kind of take you out or drop you or stop, finesse you. But if you have a community of people that you work with and that you come from, it's a little harder to impede your progress. You could distribution might look different, or production might have to shift. But the more tenacious you are to make, like when I first pitched Black News, I pitched it to all these different, I had just done Lemonade, so I can kind of get any meeting I wanted. And what I wanted to do was a news show. And I didn't tell people that until I got into the room, but you could just see people's eyes as they glaze over, like, that's not what we thought you were gonna say. But I pitched everybody, and nonetheless, and everybody said no. And I guess that's a no for some people. Like, I might need to put that idea away. But for me, I was like, fuck it, I'm gonna make it anyway. I'm gonna just download shit off of YouTube and kind of hack it up, and just so I can get a better sense of maybe what their issue was, is they needed to see a version of it, And in that process, some curator did a studio visit, and he was like, hey, what are you up to? And I was like, you're probably not interested, but I'm interested in the news. And he was like, do you have something to show? I was like, yeah, but I wasn't thinking of it as art. That was what I was making, and he saw it. And little did I know that he was curating the Venice Biennial, and he was really moved by what he saw. And he said, would you be okay if I put this in my next exhibition? And I was like, sure. He didn't say it was the Venice Biennial. He said, I'm working on an exhibition. And then he called me 3 months later and was like, we're going to officially invite you to that. And I was like, what? And that's when I started thinking about it as an artwork. So all that to say, you got to be vigilant as fuck to just get your idea out, but also know when it's time to pivot or something. Yeah, you got to just know in your head. You want to watch one last thing? No, we're gonna...
I have to ask if we can see one last clip, right? And you choose the Alice Smith one, please. It's clip 1. Thank you so much for being here.
Of course. Thank you guys for coming.
We don't have any much time. I don't have time anymore. I'm so sorry. My time management is pretty shitty. It's like Caribbean time management, kind of. So we are all like, I don't have any more time. I'm so sorry. I see your hand. I see it. We have another clip. Like, please go on YouTube and check out Flying Lotus Until the Quiet Comes. This is the one we did not share, and this also was like the last video clip I wanted to show and to speak about you, about your poetic language, about how you do in one image put a whole message for everyone. It's crazy. So please go and look, turn on your apps, YouTube, you name it. So have a nice evening, everyone, and thank you for being here.